With rising security threats, shifting global alliances, and ongoing wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, is it time for the European Union to finally have a unified military force? Hello, everyone. This is Mitchell, and I'm here with Carlos. Hi, Carlos.
Hi, Mitchell. How you doing?
And today we're going to be discussing one of the biggest topics of current events in March 2025 of how the European Union will defend itself and the US will defend itself against the ongoing threats in Ukraine, Russia, and the Middle East. So yeah, we're here with the Globalpulse Podcast and we're going to get right into it. So welcome everyone and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Yeah, actually, it's a topic that is going out everywhere, not only in US but also in the European Union, because at the end it's a topic that is involving both sides, the European Union and the US. So yeah, I will try to give a European perspective, not only about Spain but also about the European Union in general.
Perfect. And it'll be interesting to hear. I think in the US, we hear a lot about what's going on, but it's hard to put in perspective because we have the big Atlantic Ocean between us. So this will be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and above
So
all, after the Donald Trump arrived, so this topic was talked everywhere. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting.
perfect. Let's get right into it. So before we could even discuss the European Union having an army, we have to discuss what even is the European Union. So the European Union is a political and economic union more than anything. It doesn't have much military backing, but it's more just political and economic, and it has 27 European countries. So not every European country, but the majority of the European countries are within this group called the European Union, and it's a cooperation between the countries with a shared currency, economy, diplomacy, laws, trade. They all cooperate together in this union.
Yeah. You said that the European Union um, was an union of 27 countries, and that was a gradually process until they reached this figure. And actually, it was quite difficult because there were several requirements that not every country was able to achieve. So, yeah, I
Took
wanted to
time.
mention this.
Yeah, for sure. And it took time because it was created after World War II. But the main goal, I think, learning history about Europe, Carlos, you know more than anyone. Europe has had wars going back to the beginning of civilization. I think between the UK, Spain, there's always been conflicts in Europe. And after World War II, I think the world and especially Europe said, this is it. We're going to make this effort to form a union to bound our economies together with
Mm.
the primary goal of peace and stability in Europe. And it seems like so far it's been pretty effective.
Yeah, actually, yeah, at the end, before the World War II, countries from the European Union lost a huge amount of resources, and we saw how they were not able to invest all these resources on the economy, on the social system. So after the Second War, at the end, they had the same goal to ensure the peace over the years, and actually they got it. We've seen how we had any conflict between European countries after the War II, so it was quite effective.
Yeah, and it's created Europe into, I think European countries were always global powers. So you always had Spain, the UK, Germany. They're always global powers, but condensing them, the economies together, they're now the economy, the GDP of Europe as a whole is the same as the US, the same as China, or in the ballpark at least. So now with the benefits of the European Union, like their global influence, cultural respect for all the countries, fairness and social protection. They're really like the European Union is a global power, a collective whole.
Yeah, at the end after that, they got like a huge country unified
Mm.
with different feelings, with different national feelings, but at the end, with with the same goal to grow economically speaking, to increase the power against another countries.
And would you say in Spain, it's the overall sentiment in Spain is pro European Union? It's they support you support being in the European Union and the things that have to go with it.
Yeah, the overall system is agree with the European Union. Maybe not everyone is agree with that, obviously, but yeah, the overall system is agree with this. Actually, we did a lot of changes in our constitutions to be part of the European Union. So after these efforts, finally we joined the European Union. This really had an impact on our economy and social system.
And I think the European Union has been beneficial for mostly all the countries involved. And I think you could speak for Spain. But now we get into the topic of forming an army. And this topic is really, it was thought of in the beginning. It's not net new. It's not
Exactly.
just it's not just now that we're seeing a slight pullback from the United States and global powers defending Europe, but it was actually thought of in the conception of the European Union. I think let's talk a little bit about that right now. So the European Union, when it was founded after World War II, there was actually an idea called the European Defense Community, and it was a joint effort from France, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. And the idea was to create a supranational military command controlled by European institutions. And I don't know if you want to talk about why, like, it didn't really see itself through. It was a good idea, but it didn't fully come through.
Yeah, at the end, the main reason was that in the European Union, it's necessary to have a majority to get this kind of decisions, and not every country of the European Union was agree with that. Mainly France. So France rejected in 1954 this supranational organization because of the fear that his national sovereignty could be weakened. So, firstly, they reject this. Then it was not possible to create this organization. This was the main reason. Apart from this reason, also there was a fear about the rearm of Germany, because at the end it was the World War II was quite close. So this fear, this feeling, and I understand it, that a lot of countries were concerned about this.
Yeah, it makes sense because Germany after World War II, Japan and Germany and the powers that were not successful in the war, those who were, they kind of put restraints on what they could and couldn't do. So
Yeah.
a big fear. It makes sense.
It makes sense. And at the end, you mentioned that one of the goals at the beginning was to ensure the peace. And maybe creating this organization and providing military resources to Germany, the security wouldn't be possible.
Right. Yeah, and I think another good point is how the US and NATO were well, NATO was already in existence after World War II. It was created in 1949. And there was actually fears that or concerns that it would creating a national or a supranational army within the European Union would weaken or lessen the capabilities of NATO and the US to be the leader in the world for global peace.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that two big organizations like this, NATO and supranational European organization, can be difficult to coexist because at the end there's a interest conflict and it's difficult to split your budget to the NATO and to this European organization.
Exactly. And that gets right into the point of why does the EU still not have an army? You know, like why is there still not um a supranational army ever
Yep.
since the beginning? And it's exactly, I think the biggest concern is budgetary. So you're already spending what, like 2 to 5% of your national GDP per nation in
nations.
NATO already. So now if you create a supranational army within the European Union, you're essentially going to have to pay more towards national security or or continental security, if you will,
Yeah, yeah.
which
Yeah,
which would be tough.
and actually we see now that Donald Trump is pushing to the European countries to increase the military spend. We've seen that this is really difficult because not every country is agree, not every country is able to increase it so easily. So imagine to contribute to another European country organization. It's quite difficult.
It would be pretty much impractical, and like
Yeah.
each country already has issues that they need to deal with within their country, and pooling all those resources is not just pulling resources into one thing, it's also pulling resources away from other things. So you can't focus on things that are important within the countries. So that's a big preventer of creating a European national army or
Yeah,
supranational army.
and at this point, I would like to mention that here in Spain now we are discussing about which percentage we should increase, and now it's been really difficult to get the necessary consensus because we need a majority, but not every political party in Spain is agree with that. So it's quite difficult to reach this kind of decisions nationally and internationally.
Yeah. And another thing is, I think we mentioned this before, why it wasn't created in the conception of the European Union, but it's still a big point, like what you just mentioned. You need unanimous votes from all countries in order to create something as big as an army, you know? It's not everyone needs to agree, and it's difficult for everyone to agree on anything these days, especially countries that are so different with such different national interests. That then also you have funding and logistics. Like it takes a lot of time and resources to create an army. So funding and logistics, but also I think most interestingly is the lack of a strong national identity. So in the United States, we have 50 states, very different, you know, geographically, culturally, but nevertheless, we really have a shared history together that bounds our foundation, our cultures together. So it's easier for the United States as one nation to create an army. But when you have a European Union, even with just 27 countries, they're so different. Like Spain is so different from Germany. Germany is so different from the UK and so forth. So that's huge, you know?
And that's the really key to develop a project like this. At the end, the national feeling is really important to push, to dedicate, to contribute resources. And I think this fact makes the difference. I think it's practically impossible at this moment.
Yeah. But now let's refocus on. So now we have these global trends occurring. So you have the United States with a more than ever nationalist approach saying, we're no longer going to just give money to people without something in return. And that's affecting European countries because now European countries are having to rely less on the United States and the United States support, which is huge because the US historically has always protected or at least given a lot of resources to protect other nations, especially Europe, which is our closest ally, along with Canada and Mexico. So now we're seeing a big push in Europe, right? Like countries in Europe and leaders in European nations, they're now calling for something to be less reliant on the US and to now have a military force essentially. So what are we seeing in Europe and Spain on that end?
Yeah, yeah. The end, above all, after the Russian attack to Ukraine, we've seen how European countries are trying to have more independence from US and this way to maintain his control to these kind of decisions, to these military decisions. Yeah, this awful after the Ukraine conflict. Actually, we've seen how not time ago the rearm Europe proposal was announced by the the President Ursula von der Leyen here from Germany. Basically, it proposed to boost the European system, similar what we said with what we mentioned before, to duplicate the expense and to maintain more independence from US. Yeah, and but here the problem is how we get the consensus to get this.
The consensus, yeah, it's difficult. And it costs a lot of money. I think the proposal for the Rearm Europe initiative was like 800 billion euros. Like that's a lot of money. So yeah, it's really interesting how you have a larger push, and in a lot of sense, from an American perspective, I think this is something that the Democratic Party really did not want. Like something that Joe Biden worked really hard on was to strengthen the alliance between our European allies and the US. But when Trump came in, that kind of just went right out the window. It's like you have to stop. It's more of like, what are you going to do for us for what we're doing for you? And Europe is kind of being pushed to defend itself. So it's really interesting to see that. And also with the there's trying to be a peace agreement between Ukraine, Russia, the US, all of the parties involved. But the UK Prime Minister Starmer, he actually proposed a coalition of volunteers to provide security and support for Ukraine, which I thought was interesting because if there is a peace agreement, he's actually proposing kind of a European army, but they're going to be peacekeepers. They're supposed to stay within Ukraine after the war is over to maintain the peace. But those peacekeepers are likely going to have military equipment to maintain the peace. So we may see a de facto kind of the European Union army, whether it's intentional or not. I think it could be the beginning of something that was thought of since the conception.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah,
So,
no, they
yeah.
also when you mentioned Donald Trump, I had the feeling sometimes that he didn't have like a payback contributing so much to the NATO, and that's why he's pushing to the European Union to increase the budget to the NATO.
Yeah. Yeah, he was in one of the meetings with the infamous meeting with President Zelensky. He mentioned that like uh, Zelensky said that the United States does not feel the pressure now because we have a
Yeah.
big ocean between us, but we will in the future. And then Trump kind of had a stark reaction to it, like, who are you to tell us what we're going to feel? In the end, I kind of think Vladimir Zelensky is right in that sense. Like the U.S., if Russia succeeds in taking more, if we appease Russia to take more land in Ukraine, the United States doesn't feel it now. The European Union countries feel it more now, but in the future, the U.S. will nevertheless feel it. It will affect the U.S. So
Not directly at the beginning, but anyway, they will feel it.
yeah, so
But
yeah, so okay.
at the end, Ukraine depend on US a lot. So we see how here this US side is quite important for them. So they try to negotiate and maintain a good relation, a diplomatic relation.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be that controversial to say without the US and Europe, Ukraine wouldn't be a nation right now. They're just not powerful enough to defend themselves from Russia
Yeah.
economically and militarily. But yeah, so another thing I wanted to mention was the the sentiment. I saw this interesting poll that about 60% of Europeans support a national army within Europe under the age of 35. However, over the age of 35, they do not support a national army within the European Union or a supranational army within the European Union. I wanted to get your perspective on that. Is this something that you feel within Spain? Do you think younger individuals more so support European Union army, or is it
At this
largely rejected?
moment, I think most of the people wouldn't be agreed to have an European army, basically because I think there's a feeling that reject increase this military budget. Particularly here in Spain, we spend a lot of money in the medical system, in the public system. So people don't really like to spend a lot in the military system. And we can see that maybe we will be duplicating this kind of spend. So I think that people who is aware that is duplicating this spend wouldn't be agree with this. Maybe if you are not aware that you are duplicating spends, maybe you be agreed with creating the rearming, the rearm Europe.
Interesting. So it's more of an economic reason more than anything.
Yeah,
Do you think
exactly.
there's a sovereignty reason? Like, do you think there's a thought, like, you think it's a big thought that having a joint military would kind of take away from the sovereignty that the countries have?
Yeah, there also is a reason, and it's quite important. But I wouldn't say that is the most important fact to keep in account here in Spain. Yeah, maybe the second one, but not the most important.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. And I think to wrap things up, we could talk about the pros and cons of a European uh a unified European Union army. So a unified army ultimately would have more security and independence, no longer fully reliant on the US and global powers to prevent. The European Union would be more strong and independent. There would also be a stronger global influence. Like when the European Union was created, they were an economic global influence. They could compete with the US. If they have a military, they're also a military influence. They could compete directly with the US, China. They have the manpower, the cooperation, and then also faster response. Like when you think of NATO, it takes a long time, a lot of bureaucratic decisions that are not just European countries making those decisions, but if they have an army, they can make decisions a lot faster and with more of a European interest in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the interest conflict we mentioned before. There will be a really important interest conflict. Maybe there will be a reaction from the US side. Who knows? Maybe more tariffs to the European Union.
Yeah, I think it depends on who's in office and how the
Yeah.
response. Like I think Republicans generally they may not agree with or think it's a good thing, but they may not put as much pressure on the European Union not to create an army. However, I think on the Democratic side, I don't think they would largely agree with it, and they may put more pressure as they would kind of want more cooperation as opposed to
Mhm.
like or more US influence around the globe than a more national kind of sentiment globally.
How is the feeling in US about this kind of rearming or of the European Union to get more independence? Of what's the feeling not of the Trump political party, but just from people?
Yeah, I think without Trump in general, I think it's just that people align with their party on this issue. I think it's largely a political a partisan issue at the end. If you ask people that lean Republican or conservative, they would say having an army in the European Union might not be a bad thing because now we don't have to pay to protect them. So we get to focus on what's going on in the US and prioritize our own things, like let Europe do what Europe needs to do. However, I think if you ask someone on the Democratic side, more of the liberal side, they'll say it's a bad thing because it's going to prevent global cooperation and it's going to increase the likelihood of a war or conflict in the future. I think yeah, it depends on the party
Okay.
you ask.
And always that the European Union is able to contribute the NATO properly. So, okay, if you create your own organization, it's your decision, but you have to contribute to the NATO. And maybe if we want to increase this percentage, you will have some issues to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a nightmare for the Democratic Party. I think they work so hard and not even just the Democratic Party. I think long-standing policy of the US was to promote the United States dominance in the world and the influence of the US. And this just happening, what Trump did, just completely flipped the US policy and over. So it's kind of a new thing,
Yeah.
but yeah. But then again, there's a lot of cons to it, so it probably it's hard. There's a lot of political divide within the countries. It's expensive, and then ultimately NATO already exists, so it may a lot of countries may not see in Europe may not see the benefit of having a European army. Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting topic. And now that throughout this episode, we really discussed from the perspective of someone living in the US, perspective of someone living in Spain, what a European army would entail within the world. But we're really interested in your comments and your thoughts from our listeners. So if you have any strong opinions on European Union creating an army, what are your thoughts about it? Do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing for the country that you're in, or the globe as a whole? Please let us know. And yeah, any last comments that you want to say?
I think that's all for today. And yeah, we talk about a really interesting topic. And yeah, we will discussing about more topics related to the European Union and US because now is the topic we've been seeing everywhere.
Perfect. Okay. Well, this was a great episode. Don't forget to follow us on our social media, Instagram, X. We really want to hear from you and our YouTube channel and Spotify. So great episode, and we look forward to talking in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.
So see you, Mitchell. Bye.
Take Carlos. Bye.